My father raised his glass in front of 80 guests and set it into the microphone. My daughter Brianna inherits the company. 230 million. Chloe, he looked straight at me. You're lucky I still let you use the name. Most men would have cut it years ago. My mother laughed. Not a small laugh. A bright, practiced laugh that carried across the room like she had waited 35 years to finally make the sound. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I set my glass down, took my coat, and walked out while 80 people watched the unloved daughter leave her own family's table. The next morning, a lawyer stood at my door with a 35-year-old hospital bracelet sealed in plastic. My name wasn't on it. He said only one sentence. That's why we're here. My family thought that night erased me. They had no idea what that little band was about to erase instead. My name is Chloe Owen, 35 years old. If you've ever been told you were lucky just to keep a name that never wanted you, type bracelet below and subscribe. The part they never saw coming starts now. And while you're down there, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I read every single one. I'm Chloe. This is the story of the night my family erased me, and the 35-year-old piece of plastic that erased their version instead. It starts 25 years ago, with a report card on a refrigerator. I was 10. It was a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were when Mrs. Pell sent the report cards home in sealed brown envelopes, and I had carried mine the whole bus ride like it was made of glass, straight A's, every column. I remember practicing in my head how I would hand it to my father, casually, like it was nothing, because in our house wanting praise was worse than failing. Brianna got to the kitchen first. She was 7, and she had a B+ in something, and my father held her report card up to the light, like it was a stock certificate. He read every teacher comment out loud. He said the word effort 3 times. Then he took mine, glanced down the column of A's the way you glance at a receipt you already know is correct, and set it on the counter next to the mail. Don't fish for praise, Chloe, he said, without looking up. It's unbecoming. That night, Brianna's report card went up on the refrigerator under the magnet, shaped like a lighthouse. Mine went into the drawer with the takeout menus. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway the whole time. She saw all of it. She dried her hands on a dish towel and said nothing, which I would eventually understand was her native language. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to tell you my childhood as a list of wounds, and that's not the point. The point is what that kitchen taught me. It taught me that in the Owen house, love was a display item and someone else's name was always on the shelf. It taught me to stop handing people things I couldn't afford to have ignored. And it taught me, this is the part that took 35 years to unlearn, that if I was just useful enough, careful enough, excellent enough, someday there would be room for me on that refrigerator. There never was. But the training turned out to be worth something. I'm a senior claims adjuster now. Large loss. 13 years at Hartwell Mutual in Columbus, which means when your house burns down or a pipe turns your first floor into a pond. I'm the one who walks through the wreckage with a clipboard and figures out what actually happened. People think the job is about money. It isn't. It's about stories. Everyone who files a claim tells you a story, and my job is to find the place where the story and the evidence stop matching. I photograph everything twice. I keep copies of copies. My friend Tessa, who has the desk next to mine, once told me, "You read people like water damage, you always find where it started." I used to think I learned that in training. I didn't. I learned it in a house where the official story never matched the room I was standing in. Here's an example. When I was 18, the college fund my grandmother had helped start for me quietly disappeared. My father called it a restructuring. The money had been reallocated toward Brianna's future because she was at a critical age. I was starting at Ohio State that fall. I took out loans. I worked 25 hours a week at a coffee shop, and in the fall of my sophomore year, I came up $4,800 short of tuition, and I sat in a stairwell doing the math over and over as if arithmetic might blink first. 2 weeks later, the bursar's office told me my balance had been paid by something called the Buckeye Futures Hardship Fund. I had never applied to it. I never found an application. I wrote a thank you letter anyway. Dear benefactor, because I didn't know a name, and mailed it to the P.O. box on the receipt. Nobody ever wrote back. I decided it was one of those small anonymous mercies the world occasionally hands you, and I put it away in the drawer of my memory, where I kept things that didn't fit the story. That drawer was fuller than I realized. There was a man in it, for one thing. My father's business partner. Everyone called him Uncle Neil, though he wasn't anyone's uncle. Neil Harmon was the other half of Harmon Owen Builders, the quiet half, the one who checked the math while my father shook the hands. When I was 8, at a company picnic, he taught me to cast a fishing line off a dock while the other adults played horseshoes. He crouched behind me and steadied my wrist and said, "Some things you measure twice, kiddo, people included." When I was 12, he gave me a real engineer's calculator, the kind with functions I wouldn't understand for years, and told me I'd grow into it. And then, around the time I turned 18, he simply stopped being anywhere. No falling out that I ever heard of. No goodbye. He was still my father's partner. His name was still on the trucks. But he vanished from the barbecues, the Christmas parties, the graduations. There's a photo from that last picnic I've looked at 100 times since. Everyone is mugging for the camera. Neil is half out of frame at the edge, and he's the only one looking directly into the lens, like he's the one taking the picture of us. I never asked why he disappeared. In my family, you learned not to ask about the people who went missing from the photographs. For most of my adult life, none of this felt like a mystery. It felt like weather. Then, last November, the weather changed. Word came down that Crestline National Group, one of those companies that buys regional builders the way other people buy groceries, wanted Harmon Owen. The number being whispered at every holiday gathering I wasn't invited to was $230 million. I should explain what that number actually was, because my father never did. It wasn't cash in a vault. It was the valuation of the whole company, the equipment, the contracts, the land, the name. And the company wasn't even entirely his. My father owned 52%, Neil Harmon owned 40%. The last 8% had been split years ago among 3 employees who'd been there since the beginning, back when the whole operation was 2 men, 1 truck, and a contract nobody else wanted. My father liked to round all of that off and call it my company. He'd been rounding things off his whole life. Brianna had been inside the building since 2019, Director of Business Development, an office with her name on the door, a company card in her wallet. She was 31, and she talked about the transition the way other people talk about a wedding. That winter, the phrase I kept hearing secondhand was that Dad needed to settle succession before signing. I didn't think much about what that meant for me. I already knew what I was in that family. I was the drawer with the takeout menus. In March, a heavy cream envelope arrived at my apartment. Embossed lettering. Harmon Owen Builders, celebrating 42 years. Cocktails at the Fallbrook Country Club. I turned it over twice, looking for a handwritten note. There wasn't one. My 35th birthday came 9 days before the party. Nobody called. Not my mother, not my father, not Brianna. I ate takeout at my kitchen counter and told myself 35 was too old to still be counting who remembered. The night before the party, my phone rang. Mom. She didn't say happy belated birthday. She didn't ask how I was. There was a strange, careful quality to her voice, like someone reading from a card in bad light. Wear something quiet, she said. Please don't make him angry tomorrow. Mom, it's a cocktail party. What is there to be angry about? A pause, half a second too long. Just quiet, Chloe, please. She hung up first. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I remember thinking that I knew every register of my mother's voice. The performing one, the smoothing over one, the one she used on my father like a hand on a spooked horse. This wasn't any of those. This one was afraid. And I had no idea, yet, that she wasn't afraid for herself. The Fallbrook Country Club does a certain kind of evening very well. Low amber light, a jazz trio nobody listens to, and enough polished walnut to make bad news sound official. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom held 80 people, and I could map every one of them. That's not a figure of speech. It's the job. I walked in and did what I do at a lost site. I read the room. Near the bar, the field guys and their wives, ties they hated, laughing too loudly because open bars make loyal men nervous. By the windows, subcontractors and suppliers, working the room in slow circles. 2 tables of church friends my mother had collected over 30 years. The women who ran the spring rummage sale like a military campaign. A cluster from the bank. A city councilman. Gus Weaver, my father's foreman for 2 decades, standing with his back to the wall the way men do when they'd rather be on a job site. Family sat at table 1, up front. I was at table 11, by the kitchen doors, between a supplier's wife and an empty chair. I noticed that with a strange calm, the way you notice a policy exclusion. Placement is information. And at table 3, close to the front, sat a man I hadn't seen in almost 17 years. Neil Harmon had gotten old the way lean men do, dried out rather than heavy, his hair gone fully white. He wore a gray suit and sat very still amid the noise. A waiter had poured him champagne for the toast, and the glass sat in front of him untouched, the bubbles going flat. I remember thinking, without any particular weight, he still doesn't drink at these things. Then Brianna appeared at my shoulder in a wine-colored dress, smelling like the perfume counter at Saks. "Dad has a big announcement," she said, squeezing my arm 1 degree too hard. Try to smile for once. She was gone before I could answer, gliding toward table 1. And I watched her lean down and whisper something to my father, and I watched him nod, and some old instrument in my chest, the one calibrated in that kitchen 25 years ago, began, very quietly, to register pressure. The trio stopped. My father took the microphone at the front of the room. He was 69 and still built like the doorway of a barn, and he had the easy command of a man who has been the biggest voice in every room for 4 decades. He talked about 1984. 2 men, 1 truck, a contract on a strip mall nobody else would touch. He got his laughs. He thanked the bank, the city, the wives. He said the word legacy 4 times. I counted. And then his voice shifted into a lower gear, the one he used for firing people, and he said that a company's real product isn't buildings, it's succession. That a man spends his whole life finding out which of his investments mature. The microphone gave a short squeal of feedback, and in the half-second of wincing and laughter that followed, I saw my mother's hand flatten on the tablecloth. "My daughter Brianna inherits the company," my father said. 230 million. Chloe. He found me at table 11. 80 faces turned with his. "You're lucky I still let you use the name. Most men would have cut it years ago." And my mother laughed. That bright, carrying, practiced laugh. And here is the detail I didn't understand for another 5 weeks. She laughed early. Half a beat before the room could decide whether it was a joke. Like a soloist who comes in ahead of the orchestra because she's rehearsed the piece so many times she no longer needs the conductor. The room did not react as one animal. Rooms never do. A few of the bank people chuckled along, uncertain, glancing sideways to check the ruling. The church table went rigidly interested in the centerpieces. One of the supplier wives whispered, "Is this a joke?" And her husband murmured back, "Ray doesn't joke," and reached for his water. Somewhere behind me a phone rose above the crowd for 3 seconds and came back down. Gus Weaver stared at my father with his jaw working, the color draining out of him from the collar up, and he set his glass down on a tray with exaggerated care, as if the alternative were throwing it. And at table 3, a chair scraped. Neil Harmon was half out of his seat. His knuckles were bloodless on the chairback, and his mouth was open around a word that never arrived. For 1 long second I thought he was having some kind of attack. Then he lowered himself back down, slowly, like a man easing into freezing water, and stared at the tablecloth in front of him. I registered all of it the way I register a burn pattern, automatically for later, because in the moment there was no later. There was just the microphone in my father's hand, and my mother's laugh still hanging in the air like smoke, and 80 people waiting to see what the unloved daughter would do. My pulse was somewhere in my ears. My hands, on the table, were perfectly steady. Both of those things were true at once, and only one of them was visible, and I had spent my whole life making sure of that. I did what I do. Document, preserve, exit. I stood up. I laid my napkin on the chair. I picked up my coat from the check without waiting for the girl to find the ticket. She saw my face and just handed it over. And I walked the length of that ballroom at exactly the pace I walk through a house after a fire, past the church table, past the bank, past table 3, where a white-haired man looked at everything in the world except me, while his hands shook against the wood. My slice of cake was still at my place setting when I left. White frosting, the company logo piped in gold. I saw it in a photo someone posted later, untouched. It's a strange thing, the details that survive. At the valet stand, a kid of about 20 took my ticket, number 112, and ran off into the cold. When he brought the car around, he held the door and said, "You okay, ma'am?" "Long party," I said. He nodded like that explained everything. In his experience, it probably did. I don't remember the drive home. I remember my apartment, the coat still on, sitting on the edge of my bed doing what I have done since I was 10 years old, itemizing. What was said, who saw, what it changed. The math kept coming out the same. Nothing was different, really. They had simply held a public reading of a document I'd been carrying my whole life. At 11:40 p.m., my phone lit up. A number I didn't know, local area code. One ring, not even a full one, more like the front edge of a ring. And then nothing. No voicemail, no text. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Wrong number, I told myself. At 11:40 on the worst night of my life, somebody's thumb had slipped. I was an evidence person telling herself a story. And like most stories in my family, it didn't survive the morning. The knock came at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. 2 knocks, evenly spaced, the knock of a man billing by the hour. Through the peephole, 60-ish, silver hair combed with an actual part, charcoal overcoat, leather briefcase old enough to have a history. Not a process server, they dress down. Not one of my father's litigation guys. They travel in pairs and stand too close to the door. I opened it on the chain. Yes? Ms. Owen? My name is Martin Hale. I'm an attorney. He held his card up to the gap, level with my eyes, and waited without a flicker of impatience while I read it. Hale and Croft, attorneys at law, estates, trusts, and succession planning. I apologize for the hour, and for the day. If my father sent you, he didn't. I'm not here about last night, Ms. Owen. A beat. I'm here about a night 35 years ago. There are sentences that rearrange the furniture of your head. I looked at the card again. Estates. Trusts. Not a fixer. Not a threat. At least not the shape of threat I knew. I closed the door, slid the chain, and opened it. And then, because I am who I am, I said, "Give me 1 minute," left him standing in the hallway, and looked him up on the State Bar's website. Martin R. Hale. Licensed 1993. No disciplinary history. Photograph matched. I was still in exactly the same spot when I opened the door again, and something in his expression suggested he'd expected the pause and approved of it. At my kitchen table, he declined coffee, set the briefcase flat, and took out a single item, a clear plastic sleeve, sealed along one edge, the kind I use for fire scene evidence. Inside was a hospital bracelet, not white, not anymore. 35 years had turned it the color of weak tea. The kind with a typed insert under a plastic window, the way they did it before barcodes. I didn't touch it. I leaned in and read it through the sleeve. Baby Girl Calloway, 03-12-91, and a small stamped number in the corner. March 12th, 1991, is my birthday. Calloway is not my name. It's my mother's maiden name. A name that, as far as the official record of my life was concerned, she'd stopped using 2 years before I was born. I sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with a claim where the dates don't work. And then the second thing landed, the thing my hands understood before my head did, because I have handled patient records and injury files for 13 years. The bracelet was too big. An infant band is a little loop you could wear as a ring. This one was sized for a wrist, an adult wrist. Hospitals in those days ran matching numbered bands, one for the mother, one for the baby, and one for the support person, the family member allowed through the nursery doors. The numbers had to match or you didn't hold the child. Somebody had worn this. The night I was born, somebody stood in that hospital wearing a band that matched mine. I looked up. Hale was watching me do the math, and when he saw me arrive, he nodded once, almost gently. "That's why we're here," he said. I made him repeat everything twice, and he never varied a word. His client had kept this bracelet for 35 years. His client wished to meet me. His client's name, for the moment, he was not authorized to share. "Then we're done," I said. "I don't take meetings with anonymous men about my own birth. That's a reasonable position." He didn't move. "I'd hold it too, so I'll tell you the one thing I am authorized to say." He laid his hand flat next to the sleeve, not touching it. "My client was at the hospital before your father was." The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere below us, a neighbor's television murmured a game show. "That's not possible," I said. "I was born 3 hours from here. My mother went into labor early, visiting my grandmother in West Virginia. My father drove through the night. That's the story." "That's the story," Hale agreed, in a tone that did something terrible to the word story. I asked why now. Why this particular morning, out of 12,000 mornings? He glanced at his watch, an old habit rather than impatience. "Because last night, Ms. Owen, my client ran out of reasons to wait. Last night, the party, the missed call at 11:40. I kept my face still and my voice flat, the deposition voice, and told him I would verify everything independently before I agreed to anything, and that if any part of this was a maneuver connected to my father's company, I would find the seam, because finding seams was my profession." For the first time, something close to a smile crossed his face. "My client said you'd say approximately that." He stood, buttoned his coat, and left the sealed sleeve on my table. "It's yours. It always was, in a sense. One more thing, so you don't waste a trip, a birth certificate won't help you. Under the law, a married woman's husband is presumed the father and goes on the record automatically. Nobody checks. The system fills in the story it's handed." He paused at the door. "Paper is only as honest as the people feeding it, Ms. Owen. I suspect you knew that before I did." Then he was gone, and I was alone with a piece of plastic older than my memory. I did not cry, and I did not call the number he left. I did what I do. I took a manila folder from my desk, wrote CO, Origin on the tab, and started a file on myself. By noon I knew that Camden Valley Medical Center in Parkersburg, West Virginia, the hospital where I was born, had closed in 2011, and that its records had been transferred to the county's custody. Retrieval in person, government ID, business hours only. Fine. I've pulled records from courthouse basements in 4 states. Then I called my mother. I kept it light. Sunday call light. And 2 minutes in I asked, as if it had just floated through my mind, "Hey, what hospital was I actually born in?" Somebody at work was doing one of those ancestry things. The pause was 2 seconds long. I know because I was counting, and because 2 seconds is an eternity in a conversation between a mother and a daughter about a simple fact. "Camden Valley," she said, and then the rest came out smooth and fast, a recitation. "Early labor, Grandma Lorraine just widowed and poorly, your father driving all night, snow on the mountains, sanded and polished, every corner rounded." Then, with no transition at all, "Your father expects an apology, Chloe. That's the only paperwork this family needs." She hung up before I could decide which lie to answer. That night, at 9:52, my phone buzzed. "Brianna, whatever you're digging for, stop embarrassing the family." I read it 4 times. I had told no one. Not Tessa, not a soul. I had made exactly 1 phone call, to my mother, about a hospital. Somewhere between my mother's kitchen and my sister's thumbs, a wire ran that I couldn't see. I put the phone face down, looked at the tea-colored band on my table, and understood that I was no longer investigating a bracelet. I was investigating my family, and they already knew. I took Thursday and Friday off. 13 years without using sick days buys you an unquestioned long weekend. The drive to Parkersburg is 3 hours of interstate that turns into River Valley, the hills closing in green and low the way they do in that corner of West Virginia. I had done the drive as a child, visiting Grandma Lorraine. I remembered the bridge over the Ohio, the smell of her porch. What I had never done was think about the drive itself. 3 hours. My mother, 9 months pregnant, 3 hours from her husband, her doctor, her house. Women don't drift that far from home in their last month by accident. They go there. The county records office lived in an annex behind the courthouse, a long room of metal shelving and the particular silence of paper nobody has asked for in decades. The clerk was a woman around 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and when I explained what I wanted, she brightened the way archivists do when someone finally wants the thing they've been keeping. Camden Valley, Lord, yes. When they shut the doors in 2011, everything came here on pallets. Nobody sorted it, no budget. It's all in the boxes the hospital packed. She led me back through the stacks. You're lucky it's a birth. Births they kept forever. It took 2 hours and a microfilm reel to find March 1991. The reader threw that pale green light they all throw, and I turned the crank slowly, watching other people's emergencies slide past, until the admission sheet came up and my own history looked back at me in smudged typescript. Patient, Callaway, Janet. Admitted. March 11, 1991, 6:20 p.m. Maiden name, 2 years into her marriage. Address given, her mother's house on Beechwood Street, not the house in Columbus where her actual life was. And then the line that stopped my breath for a reason no one outside my profession would notice. Payment. Self. Paid in full. No insurance. My father's company had group coverage even back then. I'd seen the old plan documents in a claims archive years ago, back when Harmon Owen was a client file and not a wound. A married woman with insurance, paying cash for a delivery 3 hours from home, under a name she no longer used. Here is what 13 years of claims work teaches you. Cash where insurance should be is never an accident. Insurance creates records, claims, statements, envelopes that arrive at a husband's address. Cash creates nothing. Cash is what you use when you are paying for silence along with the service. My mother hadn't gone to West Virginia to nurse her mother. She had gone there to make my birth invisible. I sat back from the reader and made myself breathe on account, the way I do when a claimant starts screaming. Then I turned the crank again and found the emergency contact line and felt the floor tilt 1 more degree. Emergency contact. L. Callaway. Mother. Not Raymond Owen. Not her husband. On the single form where a frightened woman writes down the one person to call if everything goes wrong, my father's name appeared nowhere at all. There's more in the box, the clerk said behind me, making me jump. She'd brought over a gray archive carton, hospital tape still on it. Admissions kept their visitor logs bound by month. Nobody ever wants those. You want those? I wanted those. The log for March 1991 was a tall ledger with a cracked spine, columns ruled in fading blue. Date, visitor, patient, relation, band number, time in, time out. I ran my finger down March 11th. Nothing. March 12th, the day I was born. Halfway down the page, in a slanted, pressing hand, N. Harmon, family, band, 01Y4, in, 9:14 p.m. The timeout column was blank. The band number matched the number stamped on the bracelet in my kitchen. Family, the ledger said. 9:14 at night, in a hospital 3 hours from Columbus, on the night I was born. While my father, according to the family legend, was racing through mountain snow and arriving heroically late. N. Harmon, Neil. My body understood before I let my mind form the word. My hands had gone cold around the edges of the ledger, and my heart was doing something arrhythmic and loud, and a voice in my head that sounded like me at 8 years old, on a dock, with a steadying hand on my wrist, said, "Some things you measure twice, kiddo." The clerk photocopied the page for me and the admission sheet, and stamped them with the county seal, and as she squared the copies she glanced at the ledger line and said kindly, in the way of a woman who has watched a lot of people find things in that room, "Whoever he was, honey, he signed in at 9:14 and never signed out." I made it to the parking lot before my legs got unreliable. I sat in my car with the copies on the passenger seat and the river gray in the distance, and I called Martin Hale. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Owen." "Tell your client," I said, "that I know his name." The silence on the line went on long enough that I heard him set something down. A pen, maybe. When he spoke, his voice had shifted, the professional lacquer thinned by something underneath it. Then he'd like you to come to the lake. Before I knock on that door, tell me in the comments, what would be the first question out of your mouth? Mine surprised even me. Seneca Lake is 90 minutes east of Columbus, and I drove it the next morning with the folder on the passenger seat like a shield. 90 minutes is a long time to reshelve a life. The calculator when I was 12, grow into it, the fishing dock, the way he stopped existing the year I turned 18, the same year I now noticed, laying the timeline flat in my head, that my college fund was restructured out from under me. The Buckeye Futures Hardship Fund, which had no application and no other visible beneficiaries. The half-risen man at table 3 with his knuckles white on the chair. The untouched champagne. The phone call at 11:40 that rang once and stopped, like a man who dialed and then lost his nerve. Every one of those facts had lived in my head for years, filed under miscellaneous. Now they were reorganizing themselves into a single column, and the column had a name at the top, and I was furious in a way I had no shape for yet. Furious at him, for him, I couldn't have told you the ratio. I decided, somewhere around the county line, what I would not do. I would not arrive as a lost girl. I would not cry in his doorway. I have deposed liars for 13 years. I could survive one more table. I would ask questions in order, and I would verify the answers, and whatever this man was to me, he would earn every inch of it on the record. The house was a low brown cabin with a green metal roof, set on a slope of pines above the water. Wood smoke. A dock below, gray with age. I knocked. Steps inside, slower than I remembered them. The door opened, and Neil Harmon stood there in a flannel shirt, older and thinner and clearly, in some way I didn't want to see yet, unwell. And none of that is what took the air out of me. What took the air out of me is that he had my eyes. Or I had his. The exact gray-green, the same left-handed tilt at the corner. 35 years of mirrors, and I had never once let myself see it. "Hi, kiddo," he said, barely above a whisper, and my careful, ordered, deposition-ready first question came out as, "How long have you known?" He stepped back to let me in. "Since before you did," he said, "which is the whole problem." I didn't take me inside. He took me around the deck to the lake side of the house, where 2 Adirondack chairs faced the water. One was weathered gray, the armrests worn smooth and pale where hands had rested on them for years. The other looked almost new, same build, same age, but the finish barely touched, as if it had spent its whole life being saved for somebody. I stood between them and didn't sit. He lowered himself into the gray one with the careful negotiation of a man whose body has become a committee. He tried to start twice. Both times the words backed up on him. This man who had negotiated 40 years of contracts, wordless on his own deck. So I did what I do when a witness stalls. I gave him a starting point. "Start with June 1990, I said. I'll tell you when to stop." He looked at me then, a long look with something like pride in it, which I resented and stored away. And he nodded, and the first thing he said was not about June 1990 at all. "Your mother will never forgive me for what I'm about to do." Then he did it anyway. In the spring of 1990, the company was drowning. To keep it alive, my father took an 11-month project management contract in Anchorage. Good money, brutal distance. He left in April. Neil stayed to run everything in Columbus, which included, in the way of small companies, being the person my mother called when the gutters failed or the truck wouldn't start. The marriage had been in trouble long before Alaska. Alaska just gave the trouble room to spread out. "It was one night," Neil said, to the lake, not to me. "Middle of June. We were 2 lonely people being careless with each other, and we knew it by morning. We ended it before it was a thing that could be ended. I'm not going to dress it up for you. You deserve the actual size of it." The actual size of it was me. My mother told him she was pregnant in the fall, and told him in the same breath that the dates were survivable. That Raymond had been home on leave for 10 days in July, that the math could belong to her husband if everyone held still. And everyone held still. That was the plan, the whole plan, hold still forever. Then, in February, she moved to her mother's house in Parkersburg to help Grandma Lorraine, said the official story. To put 3 hours and a maiden name between her belly and her town, said the truth. And on the night of March 11th, 1991, labor started early, and Lorraine was too frail to drive, and my mother sat in a farmhouse kitchen with a phone in her hand, and one number in the world she could dial. She called me, Neil said. Not because I was anything, because I was the only person who already knew, and she knew I'd come without asking questions. He rubbed his wrist slowly, an absent circling motion I don't think he was aware of. I drove 3 hours in the dark, got there after 9, told the desk I was family, which was a long pause. Not entirely a lie. They put a band on me. Numbered, matched to yours. That's how it worked then. No band, you don't hold the baby. The wind moved across the water. I sat down finally, on the very edge of the newer chair. You held me. For 6 minutes. He said it the way other men say the name of a battle they were in. Your mother was asleep, the nurse had somewhere to be, and there was a window, and it was snowing past the parking lot lights, and you had a grip on my finger like you were planning to keep it. His voice stayed level and quiet, and that levelness was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. 6 minutes. Then they needed you back, and at the nursery door they cut the band off me, because that was the rule. I asked the nurse if I could keep it. He looked at me for the second time. It's the only thing of yours I was ever allowed to hold. I have been in rooms with people on the worst day of their lives. I have kept my voice steady while mothers handed me photographs of what fire leaves. I did not stay steady on that deck. I didn't sob, and I didn't perform. Something simply came loose behind my sternum, quietly, the way a wall gives when the water's been inside it for years. When I could talk, I asked the only question that mattered, and I asked it flat, because flat was all I had. Why did you stay away? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't. He went into the house and came back with a shallow wooden tray, and he set it on the arm of my chair like a man submitting exhibits. 2 tickets, Ohio State commencement, June 2013. 1 stub torn crooked, roughly, the way a stub tears when your hands aren't steady. 1 intact. I bought 2, he said. Old habit of hope. I sat in the last row of the upper deck and left before the recessional, so nobody would have to explain me. A bank statement, folded to a highlighted line. Buckeye Futures Hardship Fund. Fall 2010. $4,800. There is no fund, he said. There's a P.O. box and a lawyer's letterhead. There was only ever one recipient. And a plain envelope, soft at the corners from handling, addressed in my own 20-year-old handwriting. Dear benefactor, my thank you letter, kept for 16 years. You once wrote a thank you letter to the fund, he said. Dear benefactor, I've read it more times than any contract I ever signed. The anger came back then, and I let it, because it was honest. 16 years he'd sat in this chair reading my letter. 17 years since he'd vanished from my life without a word. 35 years of birthdays. I asked him, my voice finally cracking on it, what possible arithmetic made watching from an upper deck better than 1 phone call? What kind of love files itself away in a drawer? The kind that made a promise, he said. There's more, Chloe, but your mother made me swear. He stopped, not for effect. His hand had gone to his chest, pressing, and his breath shortened into a rhythm I didn't like, and on the table beside his chair, I finally let myself see what I'd been not seeing since I arrived. An amber pill bottle, and behind it, a plastic organizer with the days of the week on the lids. It passed. It took 3 minutes to pass, and I timed it, because timing things is how I stay in my body. Congestive heart failure, he said, when he could. Matter of fact, like a man reading someone else's file. 2 years now. The doctors read me my numbers every month like a weather report. Chance of rain, rising. He almost smiled. I wasn't going to tell you today, but you'd have pulled the records anyway. I didn't laugh. It was the closest I'd come all day. We made an agreement on that deck, the 2 of us, in the last light off the water. We would go slow, and we would go true. He would answer anything I asked, at whatever pace his heart allowed, and I would not perform a forgiveness I didn't have yet, and neither of us would pretend the clock wasn't running. He asked me for one thing, not to take any of this to my father, not yet. I've watched you square up to things your whole life, he said. So hear me. This isn't me protecting Ray. It's not for him. For you. You deserve the whole truth before the war. Walk in with half of it, and he'll spend the other half against you. I looked at this careful, guilty, faithful, maddening man. My father, apparently. The word wouldn't attach yet. It hovered near him like a band that didn't fit. And I heard the one thing he still hadn't given me. What did you swear to her, Neil? The lake had gone the color of slate. He looked at it for a long time. Come back Saturday, he said. Bring your questions. I'll bring the rest of it. That Saturday, the 4th of April, he was waiting on the dock with 2 rods, and beside the bait cooler sat a green metal tackle box with a strip of masking tape on the lid, and on the tape, in faded marker, Chloe. You labeled it when you were 8, he said, so Brianna couldn't claim it. You were a very procedural child. 27 years, that box had sat in his boathouse. I didn't say anything about it, because there wasn't anything to say that the box didn't already say better, and we fished. He talked more easily with a rod in his hand. I understood now that the dock all those years ago hadn't been a kindness of convenience. It was the only place he'd ever been allowed to be whatever he was to me. He told me about my mother at 25, funny and quick before the performing set in. About my father in 1984, when Ray Owen was all appetite and nerve, and Neil signed on because somebody had to count what Ray was promising. He was generous to both of them, which I noted, because generous witnesses are the ones who aren't building a case. Mid-morning, watching his line, he said, in the tone men use to slip something important past themselves. I fixed my paperwork this week, all of it. If anything happens, you listen to Hale before you listen to anyone named Owen. I turned. Neil. Cast, he said, nodding at the water. You're letting it drift. And then quieter, as my line went out. You cast like your grandmother. Calloway's never trusted still water. His phone, face up on the cooler, lit with a name, Raymond. He looked at it the way you look at a dog that's bitten you, and turned it face down. He's called every day since the party, Neil said. The deal needs my 40%, so suddenly I'm his brother again. Every day, Chloe. And not once, to apologize to you. That was the opening, so I walked through it. I asked the question from the deck. What did you swear to her? He reeled in slowly, set the rod down, and told me about the card. In 1996, for my 5th birthday, he had broken the plan for the first and only time. A drugstore birthday card, a cartoon fish on the front, $5 inside, signed, Your friend Neil. He mailed it to our house. 3 days later, your mother was in my office with the card in her hand. She'd pulled it from the mailbox before anyone saw. His jaw worked. She wasn't cruel about it. That's what I need you to understand. She was terrified, and terror in your mother comes out organized. She put the card on my desk and gave me a choice. Word for word, I can still hear it. You can watch her grow up from a distance, or you can read about her in Christmas letters. Choose. He chose the distance. He swore, no contact, no cards, no claims, nothing that could ever pull a thread of the story. And in exchange, she would not build the wall so high he couldn't see over it. Picnics. Graduations from the upper deck. A company where my last name would always at least be half his. So I kept the oath, he said, and I kept writing the cards, one every birthday. I just stopped mailing them. He looked out at the water. There are 34 more cards, Chloe. You'll get them when... He didn't finish it. His hand made a small motion, brushing the sentence away, and he picked the rod back up, and I let him, because we had an agreement about pace, and because I believed I will always have to live with how easily I believed that we had time. I didn't push. It's the thing I'd undo first. We set the next one for Sunday the 12th. His idea. Come early. Bring donuts. The kind with the maple. I'll have the rest of the paperwork story for you. The folder and donuts, kiddo. A fair trade. I typed it into my phone in the parking area while he waved from the porch. Lake, bring the folder and donuts. On Saturday the 11th of April, at 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Carol Jennings, Neil's office manager for 30 years. A woman I'd met exactly twice. I knew before she said it. You always know from the first syllable. He'd been on the deck, in the gray chair facing the water. His heart had simply finished. He was facing the water, honey, Carol said, and her voice folded in the middle. He always said that chair got the best light at the end of the day. I had known him, really known him, for 14 days. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while. I'm telling you that plainly because there's no other way to tell it. The reminder on my phone stayed where it was. Lake, bring the folder and donuts. I couldn't delete it, I still haven't. Within the hour, Brianna posted a tribute. Uncle Neil, Dad's brother and everything, gone too soon. Attached was an old family photo from some long ago 4th of July, and it took me a moment to identify the wrongness in it, and then I saw the frame ended at my shoulder. I had been cropped out, not even for this, especially for this. The funeral was the following Thursday, in a church Neil had never attended, filled with people from a company he'd half built, and a family that had spent 17 years pretending he was furniture. Carol sat with the office staff and cried without apology. Gus Weaver stood at the back in a suit older than his truck. My father delivered the eulogy. He stood over the casket of the man whose calls he'd been making daily and whose 40% he needed, and he called Neil my brother. He said, my conscience. He said, half of everything I built. And the room murmured its warm assent, and I sat in the last row on the left, the same seat, I realized with a cold turning of the stomach, that Neil had chosen at my graduation. Far corner, easy exit, close enough to witness, far enough to be deniable. I had inherited his seat before I inherited anything else. Halfway through the eulogy, my father's eyes swept the church, and they crossed the back row, and they stopped. Half a second. A hitch in the cadence, one beat of dead air in a speech he'd have otherwise delivered in his sleep, and then he found his place and rolled on about brotherhood. Half a second. It's nothing. Juries acquit on nothing. But I've spent 13 years watching people's rhythm break at the exact moment they see the person who knows. And on the church steps afterward, while the family formed its receiving line without me, Carol Jennings pressed my hand and leaned in close, and what she said was not a condolence. He kept a photo in his wallet, she said quietly. Ask Mr. Hale to show you which one. The following Tuesday, I sat in Martin Hale's office, walnut shelves, green shaded lamp, a room where nothing had been redecorated since it was first done correctly. He had a folder squared in front of him and a small wooden box to one side, and he began, in his unhurried way, by dismantling the scene I'd been bracing for. There will be no dramatic reading, Ms. Owen. That's the movies. What Mr. Harmon left, he left through a living trust. His shares, this house, everything. It transfers directly. It does not pass through the probate court, which means no waiting period, no public file, and, a measured look over his glasses, no family audience. He didn't leave you to probate, Ms. Owen. He didn't leave anything to chance. Then he stood, an old-school habit apparently, for this one part, and read the operative language aloud, because Neil had asked him to read it aloud. The trust conveyed Neil's 40% of Harmon Owen Builders, the house on Seneca Lake, and the whole modest remainder of his life, the truck, the boat, the tackle, to a single beneficiary, Chloe Calloway Owen, my daughter. I heard the shares. I understood the shares. Some cold professional lobe of me was already turning the shares over, seeing the shape of what they meant. But the shares are not what broke my composure in that quiet office. My daughter. Read aloud, at 11 in the morning, by a man standing up to say it. 35 years, and it was the first time in my life I had been claimed out loud. Hale gave me exactly as long as I needed, then sat and turned lawyer again, and what he laid out next told me Neil had known precisely what kind of family he was leaving me to fight. He anticipated challenges, Hale said. Incapacity, undue influence, the standard attacks on a dying man's decisions. So. 1. My call log shows Mr. Harmon phoned this office to begin amending his estate plan on the morning of March 23rd, 2 days before you and I ever met, which makes it legally impossible that you influenced him. 2. A letter from his cardiologist, dated the day of signing, confirming full capacity. 3. The signing itself, On April 2nd, was recorded on video, before witnesses. 4. He slid a stapled document across the desk. Older paper, unsigned. A draft from 2014. Same beneficiary, same words. He carried the intention for 12 years, Ms. Owen. He just couldn't lift the pen until now. Hale straightened the folder. He was very thorough. He said you, of all people, would appreciate thorough. Then he passed me the wooden box. The personal property. He was going to give you this himself, on the 12th. Inside, a photograph, wallet-sized, worn round at the corners. A newborn, dark-haired, furious, in a hospital blanket. On the back, in pencil, 2 words, 6 minutes. A commencement program from June 2013, one name underlined in the graduate list, my letter, dear benefactor. And beneath all of it, filling the box, banded in cracked rubber bands by decade, birthday cards. Sealed, stamped, addressed to a house on Maple Crest Drive, in a hand that got older as the stack went up. 35 of them. The first rubber band snapped when I eased it off, dried out by 30 years of waiting, and the small crack of it in that quiet office undid me more than the trust had. I opened only one, there at Hale's desk, the first. A cartoon duck holding a balloon, inside in strong younger handwriting. You are one today. I stood across the street from the party with a gift I couldn't bring in. You wore a yellow dress and you hated your shoes. Whoever you turn out to be, I already like her. N. 34 more, sealed. And at the bottom, the last one, dated this year, March 12, 2026, the ink barely 2 months old, noticeably thicker than the rest. I ran my thumb along its edge. I didn't open it. Not there. Some envelopes you have to earn a room for. That night, at 11:41, 1 minute later on the clock than the call that started everything, my phone took a voicemail from my father. The first words he had aimed at me since the microphone. There was no hello. I don't know what that old man told you, or what you think it makes you. His voice had the low, pleasant evenness he used just before he stopped being pleasant. The company has lawyers, Chloe. Papers are coming. You will sign what we send you, and this stays a family matter. Don't make this ugly. You've always known how to be invisible. It's the one thing you're good at. I played it twice, saved it, emailed a copy to myself and one to Hale. Document. Preserve. The second voicemail came the next morning, in a voice like warm syrup. Chloe, God, it's been a minute. Coffee? Just us girls? Us girls. We had never once been us girls, which is exactly why I went. She picked a cafe near her office and arrived 11 minutes late in white, air kissing the space beside my ear. For 10 minutes she performed sisterhood, my hair, her stress, the wedding of someone I'd never met. I gave her almost nothing, just enough nods to keep the tape rolling. And I do mean tape. My phone sat face down between us, recording. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I've recorded contested claim interviews for 13 years. You may consider that cold. In my family, cold was climate. I just learned to dress for it. She got to it over her second oat milk latte. So, Uncle Neil. A sad little head tilt. Dad's devastated, obviously. And look, everyone understands he got confused at the end. Sick people fixate. It's actually really common. She turned her cup by the handle. The family wants to honor his memory without a circus. So Dad's prepared to be incredibly generous. 2 million, Chloe, for a signature and some discretion. That's life-changing money for someone like you. Someone like you. I let the phrase sit in the sun between us. And if I don't sign? The sisterhood drained out of her face the way water drains out of a bathtub. Gradually, then all at once, down to the cold enamel. She leaned in, and her voice dropped into a register I'd never heard from her, flat and managerial. Then let me be honest, since nobody else in this family ever is. You were a rounding error in this family. A rounding error with good grades. Don't become a complication. She settled back, recomposed, checked her phone, signaled for the check and paid it. I watched her do it, with the company card. At the door she turned, sunlight catching her like a closing argument, and delivered the line she must have rehearsed in the car. Dad's lawyers say a will from a dying man is easy to break. I thought about the call log dated 2 days before I met Hale, the cardiologist's letter, the video, the 12-year-old draft in the same handwriting of intent. Tell them to try, I said, and finished my coffee. They didn't try the courts first, they tried the family. Within days, a version of me was circulating through the Owen relatives like a chain letter. Chloe, the estranged one, always so cold, had gotten her hooks into poor sick Neil at the end and manipulated him out of his fortune. My great-aunt's daughter stopped replying to me. A cousin's husband viewed my messages and said nothing. An aunt I'd seen twice in a decade texted me a paragraph that ended, "Whatever you think you found, Neil was sick. Sick men imagine things." The first Sunday in May, there was a baby shower for my cousin Dana. I knew because the family group chat, Owen family, spent 2 days coordinating casseroles. I watched the messages scroll. And then, between a photo of a diaper cake and someone's parking question, the thread simply vanished from my phone, replaced by a single line of gray system text. "You were removed from Owen family. Group admin, Brianna Owen." Of course, erasing me had always been the one family project she managed personally. I sat with my thumb over the dead thread for a long moment. It's a small thing, being deleted from a group chat. It is also, when your family has already deleted you from a toast, a photograph, and a will's worth of love, not a small thing at all. I was still sitting there when a text arrived from a number I hadn't seen in years. Doris Calloway. My grandmother Lorraine's younger sister. 81 now, sharp as a tax audit, the only relative who'd ever sent me a card in college. "Call me. Your Grandma Lorraine's funeral. There's something you need to hear about a neighbor and a hospital." I called before I finished reading it. Doris didn't do preamble. "They're telling stories about you, so I'm going to tell you a true one." 2009. Lorraine's funeral, the reception after, at the house on Beechwood. You'd have been, 18? You were handing out coffee. I remembered the day in watercolor, the casseroles, the smell of carnations, my mother's church voice. There was a neighbor there, sweet old thing, Edith something, lived across from Lorraine for 40 years. And she comes up to your father, right in the living room, and she takes his hand, and she says, I was standing close enough to spill my punch. She says, "I always meant to tell you. That partner of yours, the night your Janet had her baby, drove like a crazy man to get her to that hospital. Sat that whole night. What a good man." The phone was slick in my hand. "Your father didn't say a word," Doris went on. "But I watched his face go gray as that casket, Chloe. Gray. And your mother appeared out of nowhere and steered that poor woman to the dessert table like she was defusing a bomb." A pause. "They left 20 minutes later. He didn't say one word the whole drive to the motel. Lorraine's neighbor drove behind them and told me. And your mother stared out the window like the glass owed her money." 2009. I laid it against my own file, and the file lit up. The fall of 2009 was when my college fund was restructured to Brianna. The year Neil stopped appearing anywhere my father controlled. I had spent my adult life reading those two facts as coincidence and thrift. They were a verdict. Handed down the week of my grandmother's funeral, by a judge who never told the accused there'd been a trial. "One more thing," Doris said, softer. "Whatever happened back then, your mother and father have been living inside that silence together 17 years. Both of them knowing, neither of them saying. What do you think that does to a house?" I went to find out. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon when I knew my father would be at the club. My mother answered the door with a laundry basket on her hip, and when she saw my face, and the small plastic sleeve in my hand, she stepped back to let me in without a word, which was its own kind of confession. She folded laundry the entire time. I want that on the record. Her husband's shirts, at the dining room table, her hands moving in perfect squares while her life came down around her, collar, sleeves, fold, stack. The stack grew into a tower. She never stopped once. I set the bracelet on the table between us. Baby girl Calloway, facing up. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she picked up the next shirt. "I wondered which of you it would be," she said. "Him or you." I've been waiting 35 years for this conversation, Chloe. You could at least sit down for it. I stayed standing. I asked her about the laugh. Of everything I could have led with, that's what came out. That laugh, bright and early, in front of 80 people, her hands paused on a collar. If I hadn't laughed, I'd have screamed, she said. 20 people were watching my face when he said it. The wives all watch my face. They've watched it for 40 years. That's my job in this family. She smoothed the collar flat. I've been performing so long I don't know which face is under it. You think that laugh was about you. Nothing in that room was about you, sweetheart. It was all about keeping the roof on. She confirmed the card. 1996, the cartoon fish, your friend Neil. She'd made the choice in one sleepless night and delivered the ultimatum in his office the third morning. You'll hate me for it, she said without looking up. But you had a home, a name, a family that worked from the outside. I traded him for that. He got to watch. It was the best deal available in 1996, and I'd know. I've spent my whole life negotiating with your father. And then, because I finally could, I closed the last open circuit. That first Sunday, I called you about the hospital, and by 9 that night Brianna knew I was digging. That was you. The folding stopped. I called her the minute you hung up, she said. I told her to keep an eye on you. I told myself I was protecting you from him. A short, tired breath. I'm not sure that was ever fully true. I asked her to come with me. That's how I said it. Come with me. And I didn't fully know what I meant except away. Out of the tower of shirts. Out of the performance. She shook her head before I finished. You don't leave a man like your father after 40 years, Chloe. And you don't understand what you're threatening. It's not the money. The money will survive anything. It's not even love. It's the story. Ray built himself out of the story. Self-made man. Loyal partner. Strong family. Men like your father would burn the house down to keep the story. I've watched him do it in small ways your whole life. My whole life, I repeated. You mean me? I'm the small ways. She didn't answer that. Answering it was the one performance she couldn't manage. I picked up the bracelet and walked to the door, and I had my hand on the knob when she said it, quietly to the laundry, in the voice under all her other voices. He knew before 2009, Chloe. He counted, the day you were born. I turned. She was looking at the tower of perfect shirts. I watched him do it, out the hospital window. He stood in that parking lot in the snow and counted the months on his fingers, twice. And then he put his hands in his pockets and came inside and shook Neil's hand and called him a lifesaver. 35 years, that count had been running. Every refrigerator, every drawer, every restructured fund, every silence at every dinner. Not coldness. Arithmetic. He had sentenced a 6-pound stranger to a lifetime of proving herself for a crime she was the evidence of, rather than ask his wife one question out loud. And at the party, you're lucky I still let you use the name. Most men would have cut it years ago. He hadn't been posturing. He'd been telling the literal truth. He'd been cutting me for years. The toast was just the paperwork. I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting in my parked car outside my building, and I remember that what I felt was not the rage I'd budgeted for. It was clarity. Cold, load-bearing clarity. The kind you feel when the last unknown in a file resolves, and you finally know exactly what happened in the house. The next week was preparation, and I'll keep it brief, because Neil taught me that the strongest case is the one you don't have to perform. Hale confirmed what the counterfeit thunder from my father's lawyers was worth. A challenge letter had arrived, all bluster and boilerplate, and died quietly against the call log, the doctor's letter, the video, and the 12-year-old draft. He never even had to mention my recording of Brianna's coffee performance. He simply noted to me that it existed, the way you note a fire extinguisher. On the 29th of April, 2 people from Crestline asked to meet me, the buyer, taking the measure of the surprised shareholder. They came expecting, I think, a grieving amateur. They got 40 minutes of questions about deal structure, employee retention, and what happens to evaluation when its founding story turns out to be load-bearing fiction. Afterward, the senior one, a silver-bobbed woman named Marsh, shook my hand a second time, in the way that means recalculating. The shareholders' meeting. Every holder, both companies' counsel, one room, was set for Friday, May 8th. Hale and I spent 2 evenings on it. When I finally told him what I intended to do, in his office with the green lamp on, he sat back, took off his glasses, and looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't file. Then he pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and wrote 3 words on it, and underlined them twice, and turned it around so I could read. Let them talk. The boardroom at Harmon Owen holds a long walnut table and, on the far wall, a framed photograph from 1984, 2 young men in hard hats in front of a half-poured foundation, my father's arm around Neil's shoulders, both of them squinting into a future they thought they'd agreed on. On the morning of May 8th, 25 people sat under that photograph. The Crestline team down one side, Marsh at the center, the company's counsel. The 3 employee shareholders, work-tanned men in their best jackets, holding their 8%-like hats in their laps. Gus Weaver by the door. Department heads. Brianna in white at my father's right hand. And my mother, seated slightly apart, whom my father had ordered in, I learned this later, for the optics of family unity. I sat at the far end with Hale, a manila folder in front of me, and the small clear sleeve resting on top of it. My father opened the meeting the way he opened everything, by assigning it a size. Before we get to real business, he said, a housekeeping matter. My late partner's shares are in dispute, pending some family questions. To keep the closing on schedule, we're asking Ms. Owen to sign a simple proxy this morning so the adults can proceed. Ms. Owen, the adults. 25 people looked at me, and most of them had also looked at me on the 21st of March, and I could see them braced for either tears or a scene. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice, because I have never once in my life needed to, and I placed the sleeve in the middle of the table where everyone could see the small tea-colored band inside it. Before anyone signs anything, I said, the room should understand what's actually in dispute. And then I did the thing I do. I read the file aloud. Flat, dated, sourced. A woman admitted to Camden Valley Medical Center on March 11, 1991, under her maiden name, 3 hours from home, paying cash where insurance existed. An emergency contact line that does not list her husband. A visitor log, county stamped, recording that at 9:14 p.m. on March 12th, a man signed in as family, wearing support band 0114, matched to the newborn, and never signed out. The band in question, kept for 35 years, on the table in front of them. The man in question, Neil Harmon. Nobody moved. The 3 employee shareholders had gone very still. Marsh was watching my father. My father laughed. One hard syllable, aimed at the Crestline side. This is what I'm managing, gentlemen. The sick fantasies of a dying man, dressed up with a piece of plastic. Hale rose, unhurried, and walked the table like a clerk of court, laying a single page in front of each chair. Then let's be precise about the dying man, he said. This is an affidavit executed by Mr. Harmon on April 2nd, before a notary and witnesses, with his cardiologist's letter of capacity attached and the signing preserved on video. Anticipating. He set the last page in front of my father. This exact sentence, Mr. Owen. Page 1, paragraph 3. 25 pages turned, almost together, a sound like a dry wind crossing the table. I watched people read Neil's plain, notarized account of June 1990 and March 1991. Watched the fieldmen read it, and the counsel, and Marsh. And I watched Brianna's eyes move down the page and stop, and her lips part, and nothing come out. Into that paper silence came the sound of a chair being pushed back. It wasn't my father's. My mother stood up. She had dressed for optics, pearls, the navy suit, and her hands were folded at her waist as if at a recital, and she spoke in a voice I'd never heard from her in public, her under voice, the one from the laundry table, with no performance left on it. Ray, enough. She didn't look at him. She looked at the middle of the table, at the band. I called Neil that night because you didn't come home. Everything on that page is true. Then she sat down, spine straight, hands flat on the table, and was finished. 40 years of managing every face in every room, and her exit from the profession took 11 words. Brianna stared at our mother as if a wall of the building had walked. And my father turned to his wife, and I watched 4 decades of arithmetic reach its sum in him. And what came out of him wasn't a question, wasn't a denial. It came out of him like water out of a broken main. I knew it. His fist came down on the table. 35 years. I counted the months. I watched her face at that hospital. I watched the two of you at every company picnic. I knew. I have always... He stopped. Not because he was finished. Because the room had changed temperature around him, and even a man in full eruption could feel it. He had just told 25 people, his buyer, his counsel, his workforce, his daughters, that he had known. Not suspected, counted. That every year of my childhood, every drawer and every restructuring and every syllable of that toast had been administered by a man who believed himself entitled to punish a child in place of asking his wife a question. The affidavit had made him a wronged husband. His own mouth, in 9 seconds, had made him something else, and everyone in the room had watched him do it. Gus Weaver stood up. 20 years, that man had run my father's cruise. He looked at my father the way you look at a load-bearing wall you've just found rot in, and then he walked out of the boardroom without a word, and the door's soft click was louder than the fist had been. The 3 shareholders studied the table. One of the department heads had a hand over her mouth. On the wall, knocked by the blow, the 1984 photograph now hung visibly crooked, 2 young men in hard hats, tilting. My father sat down slowly. He suddenly looked his age, and then some. A man who had spent 35 years guarding a story with everything he had, only to be the one who finally told it. Every eye in the room came to me. This was the moment I had been assigned by every version of this story ever told. The moment for the speech, the tears, the triumph. I opened my folder. Inside was 1 page. I'm not here to relitigate my childhood, I said. I'm here as the holder of 40% of this company, and I'm prepared to sign today, on the following terms. I read them in the voice I used to close a claim. 1. My shares sell at the same market price as every other holder's. No discount for family, since we've established I'm not entitled to one. Nobody laughed, which was correct. 2. The 8% held by Mr. Alvarez, Mr. Kowalski, and Mr. Brandt is protected at full valuation, and every current employee's job is guaranteed for 36 months, in writing, in the purchase agreement. Neil built this company with them, not over them. 3. The name stays, Harmon Owen, on the entity and on the trucks. 4. A trade school scholarship fund will be established in the name of Neil Harmon, funded from my proceeds. For kids who need $4,800, nobody's offering them. I looked up for the last one. 5. Mr. Owen retires at closing. The silence that followed had a different quality from all the others that morning. Marsh glanced at her colleague, then at my father's counsel, and nodded, slowly, then decisively, before anyone named Owen had said a word. The buyer had watched the founder detonate his own legend in front of the workforce. The retirement clause wasn't my revenge. It was, by then, simply due diligence. My father looked at me down the length of his table, in his building, under his crooked photograph, and for the first time in 35 years, he had nothing to withhold from me, and nothing I needed. I signed where Hale pointed. And on the line, in ink, for the first time on any document in my life, I wrote my whole name, Chloe Calloway Owen. I capped the pen and gathered the sleeve with the band into my bag, and I said the one sentence I had allowed myself, the only thing in the folder that wasn't terms. You told 80 people I was lucky to use your name. I looked at him the way he'd looked at me across a ballroom. You were right about one thing that night. It was never mine. I walked out through the outer office, past the cubicles where people stood very still not watching, and I had nearly reached the elevator when a voice called my name behind me, cracked clean down the middle, stripped of syrup, stripped of everything. It wasn't my father's voice. It was Brianna's. I didn't turn around, not out of cruelty, because some conversations need more time than an elevator lobby, and because for once, the person who owed the waiting wasn't me. The sale closed on the 28th of May, on my terms, every clause intact. The 3 shareholders got their full price. The job guarantees went into the purchase agreement in black and white. And Gus Weaver, who had quietly told Crestline he'd stay only if the crews were protected, Signed a new contract the same week. The trucks still say Harmon Owen. They always will. It's in the paperwork now, and paper, as I've learned from both sides, outlives everyone's version of events. My father was paid in full for his 52%. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story where the villain ends up in a courtroom or a shelter. He ended up rich and retired, which was always the plan. What he lost was the other thing, the thing my mother had named at the laundry table, the story. Within a month, every person who'd been in that ballroom had heard some version of what happened in that boardroom. The field guys told the subcontractors told their wives, the wives told the church table. Nobody confronted him. That's not how it works in our world. They simply recalculated him, the way a town recalculates a man, quietly and permanently, and he could feel it at the club and the hardware store and everywhere his name used to arrive before he did. He had spent 35 years and one daughter protecting the self-made man, the loyal partner, the strong family. He got to keep the money. The story died in that boardroom, by his own hand, in front of witnesses. Brianna texted me 2 days after the meeting. 3 words, I didn't know. I believed her mostly. She hadn't known about Neil, about 1991, about the Count. What she'd known was everything else. How to feed on the favoritism without asking where it came from. How to crop a sister out of a photograph. How to price a human being at 2 million over lattes. I didn't reply, and I didn't block her. The message just sits there, delivered and unanswered, which is, for now, the most honest sentence I can write back. The crack she heard in her own voice in that lobby is hers to investigate. She's had a 31-year head start on being certain. She can spend a little while being the one who waits. And then, a week after closing, an envelope came in the mail. My address in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a birthday card. A cartoon fish on the front, faded, the cardstock gone soft with age. For a 5-year-old from 1996. Signed, your friend Neil. She had told me she pulled it from the mailbox. She had never told me she kept it. 30 years, that card had lived at the bottom of her jewelry box, under the pearls she wore to perform. The evidence, hidden in the same drawer as the costume. On a note card, in her careful hand. You should have had this. I'm not asking to be forgiven. Mom. I met her the following week at a coffee place that belonged to neither of our lives. She looked smaller out of context and older, and she didn't perform, which I was learning was the only gift she had left that I wanted. I told her where things stood as plainly as I could. The door isn't closed, Mom. It's cracked. What comes through it now is up to you. And it starts with the truth, every time. First time it doesn't, the door does. She nodded slowly, turning her cup. She didn't ask for more, which told me she understood the price of asking. We sat for a while in something that wasn't comfort, but was at least unarmed. And then, as I was gathering my coat, she looked out the window and gave me the last piece, the one she'd been holding back at the laundry table, the one nobody had left to make her surrender. He held you first, you know, before any of us. Before me, even. They were still stitching me up. Her voice stayed level, which is how I knew what it was costing. 6 minutes by the window, snow coming down past the lights. She looked at me. I pretended to be asleep, Chloe, the whole time. It was the only privacy I could ever give him. All those years, I'd carried the picture Neil gave me. A sleeping mother, a secret held alone. And she had been awake the entire 6 minutes, lying still in a hospital bed, watching the man she could never choose hold the daughter he could never claim, and filing it where she filed everything. In the car, I opened my wallet and put the 1996 card in the sleeve behind my license, next to a valet ticket, number 112, that I'd never managed to throw away. 2 pieces of paper. 2 nights, 30 years apart. The night the truth was intercepted, and the night it finally came looking for me. There was 1 envelope left. I drove out to the lake on the last Saturday of May, early, with coffee and a box of donuts, the kind with the maple. The house was mine now, which still felt less like ownership than like being trusted with something. On the mantel I'd set the band in a small frame, next to the wallet photograph of a furious newborn. 6 minutes. My new business cards had come that week, and a box of them sat on the counter. Chloe Calloway Owen. I kept opening the box just to look, the way you check a healed thing. I carried everything out to the deck. The water was doing its morning routine, gray going gold. I set the donuts on the arm of the weathered chair, his side of the trade. And I sat down on the steps with the last envelope, the thick one, dated March 12th of this year. And I finally opened it. It was a birthday card, of course. On the front, a small painted boat on still water. Inside, in the careful, slanted hand I now knew from a hospital ledger, he had written 5 lines. You're 35 today, and if you're reading this, Hale did his job and I ran out of time to do mine in person. I'm sorry for that. You asked why I stayed away. Wrong question, kiddo. I never left. Dad, 35 cards. 30 of them signed N, or your friend Neil, or nothing at all. The last one, the only one, signed Dad. If someone in your life loved you from a distance, or if you finally stopped begging at a door that never opened, tell them or tell me in the comments. Someone reading this tonight needs to know the chair was never empty. I sat out there a long time. Then I got up, and I did the thing I'd been circling all month without letting myself look at it directly. I sat down in the second chair, the one with the finish barely worn, the one that had stood beside his, season after season, facing the water, kept ready for a guest who didn't know she'd been invited. It didn't feel new, it felt like a held seat, like walking into a full room and finding, after a lifetime of folding chairs by the kitchen door, that someone had put your name on the good one and defended it for 35 years. The sun cleared the pines. The coffee went warm in my hands. Somewhere out on the water, a fish rose and rippled the light and I laughed, a small, unpracticed laugh, the kind that comes on time. Some inheritances are money. Mine was 6 minutes, 35 cards, and a chair that had been waiting for me the whole time.